Hello, and welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach podcast. And I am here with yet another high demand coach, and that is the one and only Thom Dennis. Now, Thom served as a Royal Marines officer for 17 years, and since his retirement has brought their discipline and leadership ethos to all his projects. He's worked with a wide range of clients, including Citigroup, RBS, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, GSK, Altana, BP, Shell, Centrica, Subsea 7, ConocoPhillips, and Transocean, just to name a few, and frequently facilitates multinational meetings in the UK and mainland Europe, in the US, and even in Africa and across the Far East. Now, his expertise lies in executive coaching for personal and organizational change. And Thom is passionate about building safe environments by making equity, inclusion, and diversity central to helping both the business and its people thrive. Well, I'm so excited to have you here on the show. I told you as we were kind of opening up ahead of time, I love having people from your side of the pond because they've been amazing guests. And I have no less expectation for this. Just what I've seen so far and doing some research for the episode, I'm really, really excited to have you here. So Thom, welcome to the show. Before we dive into some of this work that you're doing, I'd love for you to just share, what were you doing before getting into coaching and consulting, and how did that lead you to make the leap?
Well, Scott, thank you for that introduction. I've had a number of careers, I guess. I started as a lifeguard, and then went into a brief sojourn learning how to fly commercially, which ended when I scared my instructor too much, and then went into industry for a few years. Then I joined the Marines. And it wasn't an aim of mine, but I did end up doing a lot of teaching around leadership in the Corps. And so when I, retired, resigned, bit of both, I looked for an organization that could sort of help me move on from what I had been doing. And I saw this coaching thing, and there was just one organization in the UK at that time that was offering coaching. And so I talked to them, and it sounded very much like what I'd already been doing in teaching in one of the military colleges, although we hadn't called it coaching at that stage. So I joined up, and they gave me some training on coaching, which was mostly how to go to the yellow pages and phone people. And it was all a bit basic in those days. And a few years after that, I went on a master's degree, which was actually probably one of the best courses I've ever done, which really looked at the psychology of change and looking at individual, group, and organizational levels. And that was where the coaching really took a much deeper root, if you like. And so I took that model, individual, group, and organizational, into the work that I was doing. And really, in many ways, it hasn't changed. The topics have changed a bit. And the approaches are a little bit more eclectic than they were at the beginning. But yeah, I went into coaching. I mean, if I'm honest, I applied for an awful lot of jobs when I left the Marines, but nobody even replied to one of my letters. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to go out and do this myself. And, I'd had some experience of life already, but learned a lot just by talking with CEOs about the issues and challenges they were having.
And I want to dive in on something that I saw on your website, and it's this idea of helping transform cultures. And the question that jumped to my mind is, why is it that so many cultures need to be transformed? Is that a function of something going wrong? Is it a function of something going right? Why do we need to change cultures? So why is that such a prevalent need?
Well, cultures are created, that they are initially formed by the founder. And then depending on who they recruit, the kind of people, but essentially the leadership, what they do and how they behave is what cascades through an organization. Now, the driving forces in young organizations are very powerful because it's about survival, largely, and getting money and so on. So that driving force can sometimes create a culture which is pretty dysfunctional. And it's interesting that small organizations tend not to have HR functions, but when they get to a certain size, they feel the need to have an HR function. And by that time, very often there are things that are quite well embedded, which makes HR a very difficult function to have. So on the other side, organizations used to drive society. It's the other way around now. And a lot of leaders in organizations are finding that really quite hard. It's society that's making demands on them. You know, we want you to think about Black Lives Matter. We want you to make space for disabled people. We want you to make space for people that you don't necessarily think will fit with your culture because it's a very limited one. So as things grow, society is pushing on them to open up in different ways. And that can be really hard, particularly when the leaders resist it. That's a very short answer to a very big question.
Yes, that's a great answer. And it leads me to kind of a next question here is like, what do you see is there a trend to the type of change that leaders are having to make? Are there common shifts that are happening, or is it case by case? Is it different in every organization?
I don't think it's very good to try and put people or organizations or cultures in boxes. I do think, though, that the demands that are being made from the outside are creating stressors which didn't used to exist. And particularly in the States, you know, when you can hire and fire, it's really easy. In Europe, it's very difficult. People have much more protection. So I think that's one challenge, is when an organization spreads outside the US or tries to set up as subunits, if you like, in other countries, and they try and impose their culture on that country, they often run into a lot of problems very quickly. So as I said, the social changes are creating stresses, and you know, you're getting a lot more suicides, for instance, of young men in particular. And there are lots of reasons for that. But I think one of the things that society is doing is saying, we want you to be responsible, our employer, for the well-being of your people. And in the old days, they didn't have to worry about that, frankly. So I suppose from the social point of view, yeah, there are typical changes. I think another thing is mergers and acquisitions. As the way I see the world, there aren't many mergers. There are mostly acquisitions. And depending on the care that the acquirer takes, they can actually destroy the value of what it is that they're acquiring by not looking at the difference in their cultures. And frankly, that needs an expert to come in and talk to them about, because I have seen the same mistake made over and over and over again, where organizations say, oh, well, we're taking them. They're in the same business as us. There's no problem. But actually, the way that things are done in the different organizations can be very different.
Yeah.
And the irony of most mergers and acquisitions is the people who set up the deal make the money on the deal, and then they push off to the Bahamas, and the people left holding the baby find it really difficult, and the losses occur afterwards, after the initial money's been made. So I think people need to pay attention to that one.
Right. So something that I've heard in a number of your responses here, kind of the need to kind of re-envision, expand our culture to make it bigger, if you will. How do you know as a leader, you know, if you don't if you're open to everything, then you're standing on nothing, right? So you still have to have an identity as an organization. So how do you strike the balance between expanding it to be big enough to include all those that are part of that culture, that you need to be in that culture, but not making it so open that we lose our identity as an organization.
Yes, I've worked with some CEOs, and you go and you say, well, what's the culture like? They say, oh, we don't have a culture here. And that's just plain wrong. There's always a culture. And I think that leaders have to be sensitive to their growth. Very often entrepreneurs that set up an organization, take it to a certain level, and after that it needs a different type of person to take it on from there. And one of the great challenges for startup entrepreneurs is to know when to let go. That's not answering your question, but I think it's a very important aspect of this. So if you hire people for their values and it's a sort of ethos, more than you hire them just because they've got a skill that you think that you need, you will tend to grow an organization. And by the way, you're transparent. I think that's really important. It's like sowing seeds, and as they grow, you water them, you nurture them, you look after them. And what that does is, by osmosis, it brings that healthy sense of growth into the organization. Now, the leaders will always hold a responsibility and the identity. But if an organization has been set up by some entrepreneurs, they have a passion. They want to do something. They want to create something. That's not gonna change. But in order for them to grow, underneath them, they need healthy interchange. They need people who will communicate, cross-function, all this kind of thing, which is great as long as the leaders allow that to grow. What you've essentially is the fundamental of delegation. You know, it's so easy for people to say, "Oh, I would delegate, but it takes too long, and it's much simpler if I just do it." Well, yes, it is, but nobody's going to grow underneath you, and they're going to. All you're going to do is grow a resistance and a cynicism, and so you've got to help people grow, and then, well, I say organizations thrive when people thrive. So you can still hold on to the identity of what you wanted to set up, but allow people to help that grow.
Yeah. It's such an interesting challenge, and I think there is no one simple solution, right? I think it's being willing to step into it and really deal with each of those challenges as they come up, to really be. And I think the point you're making is being open to, hey, how do we need to change? How do we need to grow? How do we need to develop? That's really good. So it brings me to a question. I want to actually go back to the mergers and acquisitions point that you made earlier. And I saw something on your site. You said you can't impose a new vision and values on people. They need to see the new behaviors being lived every day by senior management. And when that happens, the vision and particularly the values can cascade all the way down the organization. Tell me what you mean by that.
The amount of money that so many organizations have spent on a new identity, they get all these identity consultants and PR and everything else, and they produce. Firstly, the leaders go off and they do this workshop, and they come back and they're all rah rah rah, and they've got all these new ideas and new values and maybe even a new purpose, and left to their own devices, they produce these really glossy brochures and big posters, and this is what we believe in, and people come in the morning and they look at this stuff and they say, "Oh, is that my values? I didn't know that." And what you do is you create a natural resistance to it. So what I always say to the C-suite, the leaders, is if you want to create all that stuff, then fantastic. But don't talk about it. Live it.
Yeah.
Be it. And what people in the organization notice is a slight change. But on the whole, if they've done their homework well, it's a good change and they like it. So that 6 months later, the organization says, we'd like to roll out these values. How does that sound? So they don't say, these are your values. They say, how about this? And what it does is it falls on very well watered and fertilized ground because they've been living those and people have been seeing it. And so what it does is produce a congruency. It's a consistency of being and doing, which really resonates, and therefore it's much easier for people then to engage with it.
Yeah.
You can't do these things overnight.
Yeah, it is so true. I forget what the study was. I won't even quote the metrics, but the idea of what we say versus what we do. If they don't align, folks will follow what you do far more frequently than what you say. And I think you've captured that so well of, if you go out and you roll changes, even as leaders, we've got some modifications that we need to make to our behavior. We have to shift how we're engaging to align with that. And so you're right. You walk out of it and say, this is what it is now. It's like there's a skepticism just from change and just natural resistance to change. And then that skepticism is confirmed when we see even little things that are out of alignment with the words on the wall or in the glossy brochure, and the whole thing's for naught. So I've got a question for you, and I'm fascinated to see what you have to say here. But what would you say in all of this is the biggest secret that you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing, if you were to kind of bottle it up and say the one thing that you wish everybody listening or watching today knew, what would it be?
The greatest gift you can give to a fellow human being is your presence. When you're on the phone or when you're in your office, somebody comes in or they phone you, they can tell if you're not entirely with them. And actually, unconsciously, it's a huge slap. So there are enormous returns to be had if you invest in giving that moment to that person entirely.
Yeah, it's and as you're saying this, I'm kind of reminded of the Steve Jobs, saying yes is 1,000 no's. And I think what's so precious about when we give ourselves in the moment to another person is you never get it back, right? And we're saying no to 1,000 other things, whether that's said or not, whether it's the appreciation is spoken or not. That is a special gift, and it's something it's very helpful for all of us to understand and remember, and commit to. I appreciate that. So one more question here. I'm actually going to shift gears a little bit on you, and I'm going to have you take off your coach hat. We've talked a lot about how entrepreneurs can succeed and build better, bigger cultures, but I want to dive in and hear from you. Take that hat off, jump down into the ring with us. Put on your CEO hat and talk to us. What's the next stage of growth look like for you as a leader, and what challenges will you have to overcome to get there?
Well, one thing that I'm very keen on doing, and I'm working on it at the moment, is to create a new leadership program. I'm not adept at doing these things online and creating all the back end of an online program, but that is something that I'm very keen to do, because I think the skills of leadership that have got us to where we are today are not the ones that are going to take us forward. And you're seeing it being played out in so many ways in the world right now. So I think there are new leadership skills, and I really want to help to equip the people to be able to handle the huge challenges that are coming. Someone said to me the other day, the speed of change that you are experiencing now is the slowest speed of change that you will experience in the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Well, that could scare the pants off you, but it's like, how do we resource ourselves in order to manage that? So that's one thing, leadership. And I used to do a lot of facilitation, as you mentioned in your intro, of various C-suite offsites, and the pandemic sort of killed a lot of that. Everybody went online, but now people are sort of venturing out and meeting in person again. And so I'm ramping up that as an offering, because I think a lot of leaders don't realize how releasing it can be to be part of the meeting as opposed to having to run it.
100%.
That's what a good facilitator can do. So
yeah,
those are two things that I'm really looking for growth in.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Well, I know some folks are listening, and what you're saying is just resonating. You're hitting them right where they're at right now. And so how can they get in touch with you? How can they find more out about the work that you do?
Well, there's the website, which is serenityinleadership.com. You can look for me on LinkedIn, Thom with an H, Thom Dennis. And you can email me, Thom, Thom, at serenityinleadership.com. We're the company Serenity in Leadership. We're on Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the, not TikTok, not yet anyway.
I want to see Thom Dennis dancing on TikTok. That's my one request coming on. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, and I had a chance to go through the Serenity and Leadership website, and it's phenomenal. I highly encourage you to go there. We'll drop the links in the show notes so you can get straight to it. Thom, thank you so much for being on the show. It's an absolute privilege. And for those of you listening and watching, you know that your time and attention mean the world to us. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.